I truly think that we'll be telling to our grandchildren one day, wow, we lived in this amazing time. And they'll be saying, it's incredible. You lived through it. Well, what did you do? How did you contribute to it? I think it's the most amazing time we live, because to me, it's the biggest change in education since Gutenberg.
Hola a todos y bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Innovación Sin Barreras. Soy su conductor, Jaime Sotomayor, y hoy día les tenemos un episodio divertidísimo. Hoy he conversado con Anne Olderog. Ella es Senior Partner en Vivaldi, una consultora muy reconocida internacionalmente, especialmente por su enfoque en disrupción e innovación. En el episodio de hoy hemos conversado sobre educación, sobre la industria, el sector en particular, pero cómo la tecnología está logrando cambiarla drásticamente, cambiando los paradigmas que había en el pasado y cómo aprovechar tecnologías como la inteligencia artificial, el acceso a tanta data, la realidad aumentada, realidad virtual, metaverso y más. En esta conversación vamos a conversar sobre esto y mucho más. No se lo pierdan. Hi, Anne. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Great to be here, Jaime. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, and thank you for taking the time, because I know you have a very interesting background and the work you're doing right now, Vivaldi, is like very innovative, and we want to share with everyone here in the program. So let's start by the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your story. What are the steps you've been taking that took you to what you're doing right now at Vivaldi?
That's such a great question, Jaime. I don't even have enough time to think about it myself. But I think maybe the thing that prepared me most for my work in innovation is really traveling between different countries and discovering various perspectives globally. My parents already really loved that. And so I continued doing it through my youth. So I guess I got the bug of travel, discovery, and innovation by extension, because if you love understanding other cultures, you also love to understand consumers' minds, and you then love to understand in turn the new things that are happening that can kind of open new perspectives for you.
100% support traveling as a way of learning. I also travel a lot and meeting other people and cultures, and I think that you learn a lot. So yeah, it broadens your mind, definitely.
It has always been, the most fantastic experience for me is putting myself in the shoes of other people and kind of going local, living these mini lives, if you will, everywhere where I go, and trying to imagine what life is truly like over there. And it's been the most eye-opening experience. I've always learned so much from this. So yeah, spent my childhood between Europe and Africa, and then in the US, and between France and Germany, the UK, studied in all these places. And then I think this really naturally kind of led me to a place where it gave me the hunger to always understand new things, always kind of challenge myself to see things differently. And that's, of course, what I do day in and day out in my job. So
That's amazing, especially this part where you say you put yourself in the shoes of other people. If you're going to build a product or a service, then you sort of have to understand it, not from afar, but like try to be there where they are. It's easy to try to do it remotely or just, doing some PowerPoints. You actually have to feel the pain and be there.
yeah, you're so true. You have to feel the empathy for consumers or customers, but also you kind of have to really feel what it's like to be in their skin. And I think that's the most amazing experience, because I think as humans, I also think it is the most incredible thing to be able to get out of our own skins and kind of whenever we have the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling, I think that's the most incredible experience across life experiences, right? Like some will claim that's what that's what love is about, because you get to really understand somebody else in a very deep way. That's also what, parenthood is about, because you feel so connected to your child. You literally feel what they're feeling. And I just think whenever I have the opportunity in life to do this, that is the most amazing human experience. I'm just so lucky that I get to do it, not just in my personal life, obviously, and with my family, but also in my work every day.
That's amazing. Tell us a little bit more about Vivaldi, so we can have a broader notion of what you guys do, and some sort of projects that you've worked, that you've found that have inspired you the most.
Yeah, Vivaldi is this really unique place, which to me is almost like a combination of a think tank, spotting new trends and acting on them, and then creating new business models, new products, and also really bringing them to market, including positioning them and branding them and launching them, bringing the technology that suits it. So really doing everything soup to nuts. So I think it was really put on the spot by some very deep, I think, academic thinking and intellectual capital, which was always really amazing to me because needless to say, I always loved education. So I have the privilege in my job to stay an eternal student and to learn something new every day, which I truly enjoy. And so a couple of books by a founder that truly created the industry. First of all, the branding industry, and also then the innovation industry, and then the latest book about new digital business models. And so increasingly our work then evolved from coming out of brand strategy and then really focusing increasingly on innovation, and not just product innovation, but also experience innovation or business model innovation. And that's what keeps me up at night most of my days.
That's amazing. And what sort of industries have you worked on innovation?
Yeah, we do a lot of work actually across industries. Personally, I do a lot of work in also in healthcare, but more in particular in education and media. This is where most of my work centers. So spend a lot of time thinking about really beautiful subjects such as what's the future of the book? What's the future of content? What's the future of learning? How are people going to learn in the future? And then increasingly also, how does that impact professional learning and how we interact with learning and information every day? So how do professionals digest information, and what does it mean for professional development or leadership development as well? So that's my latest work. Actually, I'm preparing for next week a workshop of what we can derive from the recent findings in neuroscience principles for leadership development, and how to take the leadership development program of a large German company to the next stage.
Wow, that's amazing. Sounds great. Before jumping in to talk about a little bit more about the educational system, like I would like to know, like, what made you interested in the intersection between innovation and education?
I think we're so fortunate to live in this time, which to me is like living the invention of railroads. So I truly think that we'll be telling to our grandchildren one day, wow, we lived at this amazing time. And they'll be saying, it's incredible. You lived through it. Well, what did you do? How did you contribute to it? I think this is the most amazing time we live, because to me, it's the biggest change in education since Gutenberg, since really printing came about, and obviously then the written word became democratized and accessible to many. In the same way, we now have the ability through technology to share the educational principles that used to be available only to the few, essentially only to the princes, one-on-one education, tutoring, traveling, exposure to the greatest minds of mankind. Through technology, we have the ability to disseminate it to everyone. And so one of the problems I'm really passionate about solving is how to make sure the best of education is available to as many as possible, or ideally really to all. And I know it seems like a lofty target, and also it's really interesting to think about at the same time, how do you improve education, actually make it better, and how you make it accessible to everyone. And I think the solution, of course, in this equation is technology that enables us to create scalable models that literally take best practices from the best instructors and really disseminate it in scalable ways across millions.
I think that's a very powerful mission. And I would break it in those two categories you just mentioned. One is democratizing, like scaling it to more people that don't have that access, but also at the same time improving it for everyone else. So it's not giving what's already current top standard for everyone, but it's like improving that as well and making it scalable for everyone. So I think that's a very meaningful and powerful mission. So how's the current system, the educational systems, like what would you consider are like the most significant strengths or weaknesses that right now this system has, like globally? I know it might change per country.
And I want to preface it by saying that personally, I had a really great experience in education, and I came from the most traditional education system. So the work that I'm doing is really kind of helping higher ed and helping education in general. Really, it comes from a place of love and helping it kind of open up new markets and new business models. So some of my student years were some of the best years of my life. But fundamentally, if I look at the space and how it's structured more with my consulting or business mind, it is really more of a kind of Victorian or Fordian model, if you will, predicated on efficiency, predicated on kind of really a very siloed model where we kind of fragment each step of the value chain. And as a result, the user experience, if you will, the learner experience has become also fragmented and disjointed, and perhaps not just as engaging or effective or efficient as it actually could be. And so looking across industries, we're really seeing a couple of things. First of all, I think we're seeing a huge move across industries with putting the user at the center. This is not new, but we're seeing it across healthcare. We're talking about the empowered patient. Generally in consumer industries, we're talking about the empowered consumer. And in education, we're talking about the empowered learner. The traditional education system has not been predicated on the learner. It has been predicated on optimizing the workflow for the instructors and the educational institutions at the center. In the same way that the healthcare system, and this is not new, is not predicated on the patient. It's actually predicated on the doctors and optimizing their revenues as well as the hospitals and healthcare system. So I think it's been a huge switch, which again is not new. Already, I want to say 10 years ago, is really how do we think about creating a system that places the user at the center? And I think much as it's happening across industries, education is really not an exception. And so we've seen a couple of things happen. We've seen the emergence of many DTC models. So basically direct to consumer models where the student is truly placed at the center. So something that is created with the student in mind as opposed to the educational institution or the instructor. And so we've seen in the US some of the kind of highest valued, most successful unicorn edtech startups are really direct to student models that really provide learning directly to the student in a disintermediated model, if you will, as opposed to going through the intermediary steps of instructors and educational institutions. There are basically many, many models. So I think that thinking everything we do, I think can be placed under that big umbrella of how do we create an ecosystem of learning that truly provides a personalized path for every learner and aligns to his or her interests and goals in life and enables them to achieve them. And I do think it's really fascinating because any problems of human life are now being worked on. I was recently looking at the space of neuroscience startups. And again, as I already shared, I'm fascinated by neuroscience. I think this idea that we now can extract what we know from neuroscience to pretty much help with any problem humans can have, be it executive function or concentration or thinking deeper. It is absolutely amazing. And I'm not going to go into advocating or not advocating some of those hacks. This is a separate topic. But I think the point that we are able to think about and address these issues is very powerful. Well, we don't apply any of these learnings in learning. It's really fascinating. We know so much more about how the human brain works than what we did in Victorian times. And yet our education system is still predicated on Victorian principles and is running a little bit like a plant, right? Like a fabric, like it's very allocated times, like separate subjects.
Everybody says that right now, like schools are still designed for the industrial revolution and factory style, like input, output, we're all the same. When which is obvious right now that we are now aiming for the hyper specialization for each of the students. Just it's not easy for one teacher to do that for 30 plus students.
It's impossible, especially when they're all at different levels of their preparation and also having obviously different goals in their lives. It's absolutely impossible. I think you're quite right. It really prepares students for being sort of a cog in a web and taking their place in a fabric, and especially doing exactly the same job as somebody else with the greatest degree of uniformity, which was extremely relevant for the Victorian Industrial Revolution, but is increasingly irrelevant for the creative class economy and the challenges we're facing now with AI, where we need more problem solvers and leaders as opposed to more cogs in a web.
Of course. So how do you see this changing? Like what would be the ideal scenario for, everyone regarding getting educated?
It is a really fascinating question. I think there is a lot of innovative models already being developed. It is so fun to see. And I think that we're going to witness a tremendous shakeout where we'll see which one of those models have a future. But it is still so fun to live in a time with so many innovative ideas. Just to give you a couple of examples, in the US, one of the very innovative universities is Minerva. They were, basically financed by VC capital from Benchmark and Kleiner Perkins, some of the best names in Silicon Valley. And they are really viewed as one of the very innovative education models. They have an interdisciplinary model where the core curriculum is structured on competencies that students need to acquire. So things like critical thinking or computational skills, analytical skills, not subjects. And after that, they increasingly specialize in broad subjects and sort of find their area. But it's a very collaborative model where they really work in small groups in seminars. So kind of, not the sage on the stage model where somebody is actually lecturing them.
That model is actually, it probably prepares you for the real life way better than what we're currently doing of memorizing and stuff like that. But is it scalable? Like, are they building it in a way that it's going to be able to be used in any part of the world? It just sounds that it might be only addressed for rich people, some friends of the investors.
No, I think it's an excellent question. Again, what I think comes into play there from an economic standpoint is technology, because clearly this very kind of human touch, very intense labor more model is not feasible at scale. This is what I was talking about. It was only available to the few. We know from Bloom that one-on-one instruction in the 60s, it was determined, have 2 sigmas difference versus kind of traditional mass instruction through the lecture method. So it means if somebody has one-on-one tutoring, the way the princes did, or as you say, the elites, they will be 2 sigmas above somebody who just goes and sits in a lecture call and then basically digests some information and then is asked to regurgitate that information. We know that they only retain 30% of that. So through technology, you can essentially replicate a one-on-one system at scale. And through AI, obviously, that's the new thing on everybody's mind, is you can actually have an individualized coach in every areas of your life. I was fascinated when Andreessen Horowitz wrote this very controversial blog post last year when he said that AI is going to save the world. This was at a time of kind of great doom, and everybody was saying that AI is going to.
He before said software is going to eat the world, and now he's saying software is going to save the world. Okay.
The world, exactly. And the idea was that we would really have AI coaches in every area of our life. So be it fitness or mental health, by the way, executive coaching as well.
I think that we're not very far from that now. I mean, I consult ChatGPT almost on everything, or perplexity. Like it's like I feel very comfortable on talking to AIs more than I feel comfortable talking to humans. Maybe there's an insight there. I don't know.
Well, and I think that is really interesting because there are studies that actually show that also learners and students are more comfortable with AI feedback than with human feedback because it's very dispassionate and it's also perceived as being very objective. So I remember one of my professors at college who always said he adapts the grade to the student. So we all know the kind of the pet student kind of phenomenon. So obviously with AI it doesn't exist, and obviously all of the questions related to equity and bias, which is that instructors tend to favor students who are like themselves or look like themselves or have the same path as themselves. With AI, yes, algorithm bias does exist, but it is possible to mitigate it through avatars and things like that.
I think it's easier to correct that algorithm bias than to change everybody's mind, and like it's something so human to make mistakes. So that's going to be way harder. But I do agree that talking to an AI, for more weird that it might sound today, maybe tomorrow it's going to be totally different. But it's not judging me, judgmental, and I feel that, and it's available 24/7, which a tutor is not. So it's just the practicality, the no judgment, the abundance of information just makes it more appealing for me. And I guess a lot of students might think the same.
And it eliminates the need for high stakes testing. We know that a lot of students do not so well on exams. And we also know that students who tend to do really well on exams, this doesn't necessarily correlate to workplace success. Again, said by someone who never had a problem with exams, but I completely recognize that exams are not the way to judge a person's quality. And I think that's the big difference, that through data, we lose the need for testing, because now you can, through data, provide ongoing feedback, ongoing assessment. You can have complete visibility for a student's progress, both for the students and their tutors and the institution, and you can identify where gaps are as soon as they appear, as opposed to having the sporadic high-tech testing where you essentially wait till the end of the semester to identify that the student did get something.
I love this because I studied system engineer, so all the loop cycles and the feedback cycles on these loops to correct the process. In traditional schools, they're trying to improve it, but usually it takes months until you have a sort of sense how the person is performing. In the university, usually the 3 grades are the ones that value like more than half of it. So you're sort of putting too much pressure on specific grading processes and not if that person is actually learning. So I think that if you have all those feedback loops like are shorter, faster, then you can tune and personalize even better the approach on how you're teaching. Imagine waiting a full year to understand that this person wasn't learning through this process, and you have to change it because they just think different. I think that's happening to a lot of people, and that's why they end up being changed from schools, because after 7 years in the school, they figure out, oh, you're not a fit for this school. You should go to another one.
And I think it's so interesting. You're so right, because we know that the way learning is shaped in people's mind is we call it the Swiss cheese paradox. So they have, some learnings and then they have big gaps. And then again, without AI, it's very difficult. It's pretty much impossible for any teacher or instructor to identify it across 30 students or 50 students and then to provide a personalized approach. This is, I think, what was started by Bloom in a seminal study. And then he said that by the end of the semester, he was ready to check into the hospital because it provides a level of kind of pressure that is unsustainable for humans. But we can rely on AI to do this. And I also love the idea of systems thinking and systems engineering, by the way, that you brought to the table, because I think it's the sort of systematic approach to creating a learning ecosystem. And I love that idea because people always think it's an or. So it's going to be either human or AI. But I very much believe that it will be both. Just like now we're seeing that education will be hybrid. It won't be in person or virtual. It will be hybrid. I believe that what we need to do is create a learning ecosystem around each learner that pulls on resources, human or technology, or from existing educational institutions or some new models that truly allow them to have a personalized path and tailor their learning to their specific needs and career goals.
It's not like you can change the system and now you only learn from a computer and you don't have interaction with other humans. I mean, you still need some mentors, but also you need your peers. You can learn a lot with your peers. So the whole system can be designed so you can have interaction with all these different aspects. It doesn't have to be 100% AI. AI can be a teacher, a system, an integrator. It can manage the process, but you still need the human touch.
I know. And this is where I think it really becomes an end, because the question doesn't become how do we replace community by AI, but rather how do we complement AI, where we already have the flipped classroom model where the knowledge acquisition happens before class. And then class is spent in digging deeper and having a conversation that makes learning, as we know, more engaging and also better retained. And so then the question becomes, how do you sort of, rather than just having a flipped classroom, create a flipped education model where you essentially can acquire knowledge, the basics of it anyway, through AI, through technology, but then you have many collaborative systems. You have a peer-to-peer system, you have small seminars, you have small groups, you can have labs, can also be done, by the way, through VR and simulation. And then also you collaborate and you increasingly find your communities. And these communities, again, can be phygital. So they can be physical, of course, but also we do know that we can recreate these physical networks in the digital environment as well. And you know what the fascinating advantage of that is then you're really not limited by your geography or class. So imagine physicists working together on the same problem with other professionals from other universities around the world who are interested in that topic. A friend of mine is a cancer researcher, and this is a very specialized area. There are only very few specialists in the world with whom she can have a valuable conversation. And so for her to be able to go outside of her institution and to be able to collaborate with academics or even practitioners in pharma companies who are doing, cancer research in her specific areas, of which there are only a few in the world, is a fascinating opportunity. So now you don't need to sit in the same room to create community. There are many digital community models, digital collaboration models that actually enable this sort of small group work across borders. And that, again, is another area of breaking down barriers, of actually opening this opportunity for everywhere, because now you don't need to be just in Palo Alto, or you don't need to be just in, Biotech Valley in New England. You can be anywhere in the world and you can participate in the same conversations and have the same opportunities.
I think that one of the most complicated things to like implement all these things is how do we change the current system? It feels like it's slow to adapt. Like right now, like schools, universities, other educational institutions, like how fast are they adopting innovation? So and that's like the first part of the question, and that I would want to complement that with, and how do you see that changing? Because like I feel like technology is here. It's just they're not implementing it fast enough.
Mhm. I think it's a great question. There is a lot of inertia in the system for sure, because there are also inbuilt regulatory and other barriers and so on and so forth. And yet, just like in the corporate world, we can also all say change is slow, or not as fast as what we'd like to see. And yet, we also all know that if you look at the Fortune 500 index, you know this exercise, I've did this several times. If you look at the Fortune 500 index 10 years ago, it looked completely different. If you looked at it, 20 years ago, completely different. If you look at it 50 years ago, there's absolutely nobody who stays. So much as change seems to be slow, if you look at it actually with the benefit of hindsight 10 years ago, I think you'll agree we had a very different world, right? Not only was it pre-pandemic, I still remember the world when the internet wasn't there. So I already witnessed in my lifetime several huge changes between just even simple things such as the advent of the internet. The cell phone didn't exist when I was little, and then increasingly all of the new things around kind of what we're seeing now with Web3, blockchain, all of these kinds of things. So I think it also may seem slow, and yet if you look at 5 or 10 years, you're looking at a changed world. I do think that there are a lot of pressures that are pushing this forward, notably the changes in the world of work, because I think right now employers are not finding the right talent, or they're finding the talent that may have technical skills that are quickly become obsolete, or they're finding talent that may study traditional subjects and they find themselves completely unprepared for the world of work. So finding the talent that has not just, again, the right technical skills, but also the right meta skills to be able to collaborate, to have executive skills, to have data analysis skills that are obviously going to be critical in the future. And then also that have the learning muscle, what we call the ability to learn, to be able to upskill throughout their career. And as the employer's requirements change, are able to grow and adapt with it, so that the employer doesn't need to let them go. And we know that sort of skill is really, those are some of the key skills that we need to impart to our learners that traditional system is not doing yet. But that's where it's our job to create these new models where we'll actually be able to prepare our learners better for the workforce. So I think, to your question about change, the market is going to shake out. I do think that there's going to be traditional models as always, but over time, the market share will sort of go down, if you will, and there'll be a higher market share towards more kind of unbundled, disintermediated models, as well as some newer models, including micro-credentials, where learners are more in charge and taking the power back into their own hands, if you will.
Yeah, that's great, because it's opening up a variety of options for studying and choosing paths, and like being able to upskill faster to things that are more demanded at this point of time. I want to shift now to another aspect of education, and it's of usually when they think about school, the topic of making it fun is something that's not a priority. It's like, oh, well, in nursery school, kindergarten, yeah, you had fun. But then as you progress through the years, it starts getting serious, and you sort of debate why it has to be this way. And people say, no, because they're preparing you for the real world. The job world is boring, and everything is not a fun in games. But then you have apps like Duolingo, which retain people studying language. So what's the role of gamification, and if it's a myth that learning has to be boring or it cannot be fun?
I love that you're challenging that assumptions, because I think as humans, we definitely owe it to ourselves to challenge some of the assumptions that you just mentioned. As a parent, I also saw my oldest daughter, yeah, just as you described, sort of really, really first being, having so much fun in kindergarten. She was in a Montessori, and then going to a traditional school. This was a kind of French bilingual school, so very Cartesian. And suddenly just this sort of really the ceiling almost falling down on her, and her starting to be so sad, and the school basically saying, just as you say, this is the real world. I actually think it's so sad that even though we use the term real world, come on, it's getting real always kind of means it's getting hard, right?
Yeah.
And I think we are challenging successfully many of those assumptions, such as, for instance, that work is boring. I mean, I have fun in my work every single day. I also, it can also be hard, and learning
Yeah.
can be hard fun. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean that it cannot be fun. I think the fitness industry taught us that. Fitness industry is fitness is very hard by definition if it's not you're doing something wrong. And yet I think Peloton and other models really show how you can actually look forward to challenging yourself, pushing yourself. We created a culture of hustle and a culture of actually enjoying hard things and putting yourself out of the zone of comfort.
Exactly. Fun and being hard, they're not mutually exclusive. So you can study hard, but you can have fun in the process, and probably you'll retain or be more willing to study or to work. You'll procrastinate less. You'll be probably more motivated.
You are so engaged, you find flow. I'm taking my son rock climbing this weekend, and rock climbing is obviously very hard. Actually, I'm not going myself. I am afraid of heights, but looking at him sort of soaring above, climbing really high up in the mountains and obviously having the time of his life is really amazing. So I think we all know how hard things can also give us a sense of accomplishment and even a sense of fun in the moment. So I think you're so right. There is so much, again, we know about how to better engage the human brain. There is all the science around nudging that I was looking into. And we also have a very specific understanding of how we can use neurotransmitters release, such as endorphins and serotonin, to really help people sink into something and stick to it. And we applied this very consequentially in social media. Everybody knows that. Increasingly, it's being applied in online retail and shopping again. There are mechanisms that literally suck you in such a way that it's designed to, make you keep scrolling. And we don't apply any of those techniques in learning. And so I think that's a little bit fascinating, because as humans, we should be thinking about how to apply these techniques for good as well, right? And given the problems around retention that all the colleges and universities are facing, increasingly the graduation rate is lower and lower. How can we make learning so engaging that students cannot imagine spending their time in a better way? I know it sounds lofty right now, but there's a lot of people working on this problem.
And you mentioned retention. When I speak with people that run schools, universities, that's like one of their biggest not biggest concerns, but it's one of the things that drives costs a lot, because they spend a lot of money sort of marketing their program, and people come in, and then after a while they leave, and that leaves a hole for them. So they're willing to invest more on engagement, understanding why are they not managing to convince that person to continue studying. So I think that this is going to solve a big issue that right now most of these institutions have.
There is a lot of really innovative universities that are working on that. In the US, ASU, Arizona State, which is one of the most innovative universities, really set the goal. I remember interviewing the CTO already a few years ago, who said that the holy grail was really to create a learning experience as engaging as gaming and social media. And I think I think it's fascinating. There is no reason why learning cannot be as immersive, created on a narrative, including community, including badges and gamified rewards, all of these things that we do know really work and create stickiness for your brain for learning. And also then using data to make sure what's working and what's not working as we're experimenting, right? So again, ASU is building a predictive analytics model where they really pull data from all different sources on campus and off campus, including social media posts that really kind of create a predictor of student success, so that in such a way that it's possible to identify students who are about to quit early on and create a targeted intervention. So I think the opportunities around data are so interesting to increase engagement, and also, again, to apply all of these techniques in a highly personalized way, so that the intervention that you get is different from the intervention that I get, because it corresponds to how we are motivated, which is all in very different ways.
That's amazing. Now, I want to move it to sort of, because here there's a lot of people that are starting companies. So if you would have to start a company today, a startup, to address a specific challenge or challenges, what would you do it? In what space would you do it? usually when people start companies, they sometimes felt the pain first, so they jump and try to solve it. But recently, I've been talking to other people saying, wait, maybe the best approach is talking to people that are in, like, all the time in this ecosystem. They're seeing all these pains, and probably those are a better way of addressing. So what are the pains you've seen that can be actually opportunities for startups?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, obviously, I have two answers for this. So obviously, I'm going to come to ed tech because obviously that's an area I'm highly passionate about. But there is just, before I get to this, another point where you mentioned about the pain. And actually, I'm very passionate about animal rights. So probably if I were to create a startup today, it would be kind of a startup or almost a nonprofit, I think, in the area of animal rights, because that's an area I'm very passionate about. Several of my dogs are rescues, and that's just an area I'm very, very passionate about. So much as I really spend a lot of my time making sure that all learners have the most optimal experience, I would also love to make sure that we extend it to all living beings, not just human beings, and that we also treat animals in the same way, providing them with foster families and rescue opportunities, etc. But of course, ed tech is something that really occupies me day in, day out. So I think I would really do maybe a couple of ideas that I would love to investigate. One is, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the future of the book. I would be really fascinated to work on creating a book on the future, a book that, as opposed to splitting up content and social interaction, actually puts them together. Because if you think of it, what makes it so fun, about reading books, it's when you can share books with your friends and you can actually discuss them, right? I bet that you also remember best the books about which you had a best discussions. I would challenge you to remember a book that you read on your own that you never mentioned or discussed with anyone. You've probably already forgotten it. So I would love to create a new form of content that kind of really provides the basis for a new type of interaction around content as you consume content. So something with discussion and commenting and interaction already happening right in the book, where you can click on a word and go directly to a discussion where others are fascinated by this idea and are really discussing what it means for them, bringing in examples from other sources, and basically creating an ecosystem of content around this one idea that maybe they picked up in that book. So for me, where I see a lot of future is really reframing the content from something completely passive to something where content actually involves social interaction, and really increasingly also goes into meaningful interactions, because we all know interactions on social forums, first of all, are separate from the consumption of comments. So that doesn't make sense. That's completely artificial. And then second, often they're not really meaningful. So I think the art of kind of really orchestrating and providing a space and environment for meaningful interactions would be something that I very much want to see. And in fact, I see this as the future of entertainment generally, because generally I think entertainment is going in the same direction, where the value of entertainment is just not just the content property itself, it's the interaction around it, which also creates social relationships. So we all know how fan clubs relate to each other. Being part of the same group of people who love the same type of content gives you a lot of social validation. And so kind of really bringing together content and community and interaction would be, I think, one idea that I would really love to work on. That would be, I think, one area. And the second, I think, would be bringing in some of the principles of gaming that I've worked on, kind of piecing apart the principles of gaming and again applying them to a very gamified education system, where education is meant as a huge game and everybody's invited on a huge adventure every year and every class. I can't see how students would not want to engage in it. If I think of my kids, if every day is a scavenger hunt and they have to find a treasure, but in the process of it, they have to learn some math and measure the size of their ship to make sure it can go through some canal. So those are the types of things that I would really love to work on. And again, I think either of those would be supported by this area of collaborative learning, really understanding how do you create meaningful conversations around learning, I think is a very interesting area in which there is already a lot of work done, but basically creating this learning ecosystem, this interaction field, as we call it in the names of our founder, if you will, that can kind of bring it all together in a personalized way for learners and also expand it into a lifelong learning experience.
I love it because the first one is a perfect way of getting people together to learn together, to have this different information and make it more social. The second one, gamification, is a way of making it more engaging, and I think that combination of both is something that will make someone learn faster, better, and enjoy it in the process. I definitely would have preferred that in school, even university. I think that the methods today are still like really outdated, and it's fascinating how you can teach innovation and technology and at the same time teach it in a very old-fashioned way. But well, I hope that changes sometime soon. Well, now we are in the last part of the program, where we want to ask you for recommendations. So tell us what books, movies, or TV series that haven't inspired you that you want to share with the audience.
That's really interesting. So I really love, one of my favorite books on education is the Thomas Jefferson Education, that kind of derives the principles of the kind of the American founders, and kind of really expands on the concept of the kind of the one schoolroom, if you will, to create the education of the future. So that's one of the books that really have been very inspiring to me. The concept of hard fun that I mentioned earlier is one of the concepts of this book. The notion that education can be hard and fun at the same time, and it kind of allows us to grow our muscles. So I absolutely love this. Of course, still love Growing the Chasm. So a great kind of, you were talking about how do innovations actually cross the chasm and become mass. So I think that's one of the staples. And the other one, of course, that is really kind of huge is really growth mindset. So the book of growth mindset, all of these notions around kind of switching from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, where we're happy to challenge ourselves, get out of our comfort zones, and ultimately grow and become better. And growth mindset is a principle of successful learning.
Great books. I think the only one I've read is Crossing the Chasm. So I think that I have to read the other two now. But they're great suggestions. And last but not least, this is the time machine question. So if you had a device that would allow you to send a message to your version 10 years ago, what would you say?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Uh, I would probably say don't stress so much. And I think that with age, you sort of gain the notion that things work out. I mean, I think we've seen tremendous progress. Much as obviously there are so many dramatic events going around the world, I also think we've seen tremendous progress in my lifetime. So I kind of remain with Warren Buffett, if you will, an optimist, choosing to look at the glass half full rather than the glass half empty. And so the message that I would actually send to myself would be to not obsess so much and really enjoy every moment of work as well as with my family, and really focus on kind of some of the bigger stones, really kind of enjoying some of the bigger challenges, as opposed to really stressing about the minute.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm always stressing out. My wife is always telling me like to chill. I've been reading the books from Marcus Aurelian, the meditations, all the Stoic learnings, and what you cannot control, why would you obsess about it, and so on. And I think that when you're young, like especially in school, everything seems like important to you, and everything is something you have to be worrying about, and you stress for things that now you look back in the past and you're like, "Oh, why was I worried about those things?" So every time I'm stressing out, I'm thinking, what would my Jaime from a year from now, 5 years from now, from 10 years from now would say about this meeting? I had this meeting, or I lost this opportunity, or I couldn't travel this place. What would he say? So that works for
I
me.
think that's a very wise approach. That's what you also see with little children who are so worried about every little thing of their life, and you as an adult know ultimately they don't matter so much, and it all works out.
Yeah, and I hope that those sort of things, it not only you get to teach kids math and English and sports, but also how to manage emotions and how to be more a social person, a better human being.
More resilient, overcome
Yes,
problems, and so on. So
yes,
that's where rock climbing comes in this weekend.
yeah,
Is
that's
literally
perfect.
climbing some rocks.
Yeah,
Don't we
yeah,
all have to climb some rocks in our life? So
yeah, because I think that when you're doing this, there's going to be a moment. It starts kind of easy, and then you get tired, and then it gets more challenging, and you have either the option of quitting, just jumping out, and then feeling that you could have done it, or push yourself, and be
to that
mentally more
top,
fit
yeah,
and go all the way to the top. Yeah.
go to the top and
And
enjoy
if you
that
cannot
view.
do it, you know that you have to train harder, and then you'll eventually do it.
and try again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah. So I hope my kids get it, and I certainly hope that they get the spirit of adventure and discovering the new things that I love. But I
Yeah.
think they do.
Yeah. And again, I think that going back to what we were discussing earlier, education is just not only like very specific subjects, it's a lot of things. So maybe this AI is going to be thinking about, your son, thinking, okay, well, put all these different challenges to him because I see that this way he's going to learn all the different traits. Probably it would have been not, for me, not rock climbing, but maybe it would have been some sort of other sport or video game. I don't know, but it would have tried to see how can you obtain all the different skills that you're going to need in life to be successful.
I think that's the idea.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Anne, thank you again for this time, for your knowledge, for your insights. I love also this topic. I'm always challenging the status quo. Like, why are schools the way they are? Why they're so expensive? You know, last time that we met, we were talking about unschooling. So there's a lot of things that when I say it, people are like, "Why are you so weird?" But I'm just, I want to challenge it. Why does it have to be the same? Yeah.
I am the same. So I'm very much like you, Jaime. So it was a real pleasure to speak. And to me also, so the CEO of our company said recently, why are you so passionate about education? You were always a good student and went to the best places. And my response was, well, if that's as a consultant or as a researcher of the consumer mind, you're constantly solving problems that are perhaps not your own. And again, you do need this ability to put yourself into other people's minds. So I'm just really fascinated by all the new opportunities and to make what I love, which is learning, available to all. So I think that's what really drives me ultimately, is making sure that everybody loves learning as much as I do, from little, the way my kids are, and all the way to the great.
That's a powerful mission. Well, again, thanks, Anne, and we'll see you soon. I know you're traveling to Peru sometime soon, so enjoy it. Enjoy our country.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Thank you, Jaime. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for the conversation. Bye.